Hello and welcome to episode 51 of the Freo Big Footy podcast. This week we'll be having a look at our first NAB Challenge Cup game down at Fremantle Oval against the Melbourne Demons, and we'll also be touching on a few other little bits and pieces such as contract news throughout the week. Joining us is our usual resident Victorian expert, Seppo. How are you, mate?
I'm good, Centurions, and I'm glad to have football back. It's great to get that first NAB Challenge game out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely, and it was a nice warm day for the boys down there with a low 30s, and you could certainly see the boys are sweating it out in the first half there in particular, and obviously most of the crowd sort of hovering down one end with trying to stay out of the sun. At the end of the day, Seppo, Fremantle managed to get over the line in a reasonably scrappy game, 9 goals 7-61 to Melbourne, who were 6-7-43. So in the end, a sort of relatively comfortable 18-point victory for Fremantle, but it certainly wasn't a game that lived up to any major hype, that's for sure.
Yeah, certainly one for blowing out the cobwebs, and it's just good to see the guys get through with sort of an okay couple of highlights here and there, but it's just good to get a result. I really expected Melbourne to push us and even get a win, but it's great to see that at least there's no major long-term injuries coming out of this one.
Yeah, I suppose that's the main thing you added, particularly after last week we saw with West Coast with Mackenzie and also with the Bulldogs and Liberatore. You just, at this stage, you want to get all the guys some match fitness, but at the same time you certainly don't want anyone going down in any sort of injury cloud. And unfortunately we did have a couple of guys pick up a few niggles, with both Barlow and Mundy getting ankle injuries, and then Duffield towards the end there getting coming off with what looked to me as a either collarbone or shoulder injury, but Ross Lyon was saying a rib injury. So, but one of the big footy guys, I can't remember who it was, saying that when you looked at the sort of vision on the game, he sort of fell down in the goal square, and you thought, landing on the elbow was a classic collarbone type injury. But obviously he was running around a little bit later on, and then maybe copped a knock in the ribs somewhere. But let's just hope that's all it is, and he'll be good to go.
Something like that's hopefully may not see him out missing round one, but yeah, it's good that if we can get out with just those little minor injuries, and obviously just taking off Barlow and Mundy towards the end is a good precautionary thing. And even Pav, he looked like he was on the sidelines early, and I was worried that his ankle was getting looked at, but the way he came out was a good sign. And gosh, there were some players like McFarlane out there who were just winding back the clock and putting on a good show.
Yeah, absolutely. So out of the game, Seppo itself, did anyone stand out for you as having a particularly good game?
I think Hill, Walters and Taberner would be my three best. I know Neil and Clancy had good games on the stat sheet, but those guys just oozed a bit of class in terms of Hill and Walters, and they look like they've just transferred everything that you've been reading about and that we've seen briefly down at training just into a game. And I suppose they need a couple more skillful players to link up with, but what they did was just sublime, and it looked like they did it with half effort, the way that Hill would burn off a couple of people and Walters just turn a couple inside out. And Taberner was pretty exciting to see. We all expected one of Taberner or Aptness to finally start going, and Taberner's got that extra year development on Aptness, so he really took a good couple of grabs and led well and ran a lot. And if that's what we've got to expect, he may go missing and not clunk them or kick them all, but he's had a couple of critics on the board with the kicking style, but he certainly slotted them at that end of the ground. Actually, both ends, I think, for his 3 goals. And yeah, he looked really good. And I think maybe the forward structure doesn't lend itself to having too many tools. Obviously, they can try what they like in the NAB Cup, and we probably won't see that same 2 ruckmen with Pav, Taberner and Aptness. Can't imagine we'd ever line up like that. But yeah, it's just interesting to see.
Yeah, I think all the pre-season reports and that sort of thing have probably shown that you thought Aptness might have taken that step and maybe even gone slightly ahead, but Taberner showed clearly yesterday that he's still probably the better of those options. And as you said, he does have an awkward kicking style, but he did kick 3 goals straight yesterday, and you can't ask for much more than that. I mean, as I said, granted, a few of them weren't outside, near the 50 range, but as I said, if he keeps taking those marks and presenting well, he's just going to keep that other defender honest and certainly give a little bit more space to Pav. And even if he can bring the ball to ground and allow, as you said, the likes of Walters and Ballantyne and Crozier to get down there and sort of do their work, he'll have done his job.
And I can just think to the goals that probably one or two that Pav and Taberner scored was just a beautiful delivery by Hill and Walters, and one was a commentator's picked up on it, the outside of the left foot pushing to Pav in space by Walters, and I think Hilly for Taberner's last goal, he was Taberner just started to lead, and as soon as he led into space, Hill just popped it out into space, and just it looked congested from a replay angle, but Hill's just too smart with his kicking, and I just hope that Hill and Walters and those guys can get involved in that forward 50 entries, because if it's going to be delivery like that, we're going to see a lot more goals. And we've just seen from training that's what they want to do, put the ball into the hot spot. And even I think the colour was Crozier or Neil just had the smarts to put it to Pav at the top of the goal. So we're just quick look around. It looks like those experienced guys now know where everyone is. There was a couple of skill goes from others kicking the ball here and there. But in general, I think we've got some smart users of the footy feeding our forwards.
Yeah, and I mean the other player you mentioned earlier, Seppo, with Clancy Pearce, he certainly looked a lot better than obviously he did last year. He still seems to be just taking that little bit of hesitation. Sort of a couple of times there he could have moved the ball on a little bit quicker. Maybe he was just being a little bit more deliberate with his kicking and trying making sure he didn't turn the ball over. But it was good to see him get quite a few touches out there. The other probably interesting point, Seppo, out of that game was the fact that all off-season we've sort of heard Chris Mayne will be playing sort of, and he's been in all the games and training that I've seen is that he's sort of gone to the defensive group, and the first pre-season game he's back with the forward, so it was quite an interesting setup. And
I suppose he's just done that to add the string to the bow with the training, but where required, he's obviously done most of his work up forward and as a forward pressure, but it might be hard for him to get a spot. So at the moment, if I'm drawing up a best 22, I'm not sure if I'll have Mayne in. Maybe depending on, if you get some of these people like Ibbotson or Duffield and the other guys not available for round one, Mayne could probably slot into the side. But at the moment, I think he's just got to do a bit more, or maybe show a bit in these next two games that he does have a player, because there's so many other guys pressing for spots now. He's the type of player that could quite easily lose their spot or be on that fringe and sort of come in and out of the side every week.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone, including himself, I think in his sort of interview today said that he didn't have a great year last year, and obviously he had that limited pre-season. I think he had a number of ailments last year and obviously didn't play sort of anywhere to the level he did in 2013, but I think he's still at his best, would definitely be in our best 22, and obviously Lyon values the defensive pressure he puts on, but as you said, he just needs to probably be a little bit more consistent and get back to closer to that form we saw in 2013, just for him to make sure he definitely cements his spot. But I think the other important thing for him, Seppo, is the fact that he does give us that flexibility. So if something does happen down back, or he's one of those swing players that we actually can use in forward and defence, and I think for that reason alone, he'll certainly be. I think he'll certainly slot into the 22 at the start of the year.
I suppose this is when you're looking at you need 25 or 26 capable players to really go right through the season. Most sides use about 30 or 32, I think, on average throughout the year. So, he's going to be called on. He's not a hack. He can play really well and offers a lot to the team in terms of forward pressure and crashing packs. But you just wonder if he is the best fit and the chemistry and structure with everyone else in there. And is it forward, or is it going to be back because we're just short of options down there? So it's going to be interesting come round one if he's putting his hands up. And I think, looking at the past few years, there's not too many changes they'll do between the last NAB Challenge game, which we'll have against the Eagles, and the start of round one. So hopefully it does enough to show that he's worth to the team. And I'm sure this first NAB Challenge isn't really... I know a lot of people over-analysing on the board today, reading through the game day thread. You could definitely see players were either being told to take it easy or not to go in too hard, or some players probably making the decision not to go in too hard. But it was just interesting to see a player like Clancy Pearce, who in the past is known for his cannonball-like, throwing into the contest, to shirk a couple of contests against some of the Melbourne players, and even players like Sheridan that would usually go in quite hard. He was sort of drifting around the outside of the pack, playing more outside and on the wing, and even some players like De Boer and Mayne, I think, just took it a bit easy. And there was two players that didn't, and that was Spur and Silvani. And that shot, or in the first few minutes with Spur coming off of the blood rule. He likes to do that once every 3 or 4 weeks. And Silvani was just solid the way he kept close to his forwards. I think he had Hogan for a bit, kept him quiet, and just seemed to just enjoy or just love a crash of a pack. And thank God we've got him out there. We can cover for guys like Dawson or Johnson if they're not available early on.
Yeah, I think well, Silvani from even all his training days and that sort of stuff. He only has one speed, and that's full on. He doesn't know how to play any differently. But I think it was the other interesting play you brought up before Seppo was Sheridan. It looked like Ross Lyon was sort of experimenting, and he was sort of playing down back quite a bit yesterday. And maybe whether they're trying to see if Sheridan can sort of take that role that Sutcliffe plays down there, and maybe see if they can move Sutcliffe further up the ground. And because obviously Sutcliffe does have elite running ability, and he's obviously can generally use the ball extremely well. So it's just interesting to see Sheridan used in that role a bit yesterday, and it'll be interesting to see in the next couple of games whether Sheridan continues in that role or they move him back further up the ground.
I think people are being quite critical on him. He's one of my favourites, but I think he's got that role on the wing or on the outside where he uses a bit of pace, and people expect him to go bury himself in there and get his own ball. But he's on the outside to be the receiver, or the person that has not as many disposals, but hopefully uses it well when we stream forward. And he showed a couple of signs of that. And I think he's similar, and he's a player that could almost replace Daniel Pearce in the side. And I don't know if he started on the outside of the square on the wings a lot during the centre bounces, and played a bit, like you said, off half back. And it just enabled Suck to sort of stream up the middle a bit more and get more linking in the play. But it's good options to have players like both Sutcliffe and Sheridan that are great users of the footy and can go pretty hard in a straight line in terms of speed. They both look good.
Yeah, it was probably a couple of chances for some of those sort of, as you said, players just on the fringe of the 22 Seppo to sort of put their foot forward yesterday. And Sheridan would be one, De Boer would be another. You can't really sort of comment on Tanner Smith or Blakely because they really didn't get a lot of time. But those other two guys were, and probably Clancy Pearce was another one. Guys who haven't really quite cemented themselves in that sort of 22. And you were sort of probably, I think most people are probably on the board, and even to myself to a degree, we're probably trying to see if to expect a little bit more. And probably the word, the thing that stood out was probably the decision making of some of those guys. They just wasn't, they ran to the right spots quite a few times, but they just didn't use the ball or make good decisions when they got there. And it was probably a little disappointing. And you'd have to think that those guys will need to step up a little bit more if they want to give themselves a chance, considering we had the likes of Dawson, Sandilands, Fife, Daniel Pearce, those sort of players not playing yesterday. It will certainly they'll certainly need to step up a bit more if they want to sort of try and get in that 22 before round one.
I think someone explained it well on the board, but I reckon for the first competitive hit out, it was hot. The hands would have been a bit slippery and greasy, and just a bit blowing steam early on. There's players like Barlow and even Mundy that fluffed a couple of kicks, and Ballantyne was pretty quiet. I'm not sure if he got his hands and did too much with the ball either. So there wasn't too many players other than Hill and Walters that were very, very clean with their disposal. I think Crozier was another one that was quite clean by foot. But you can see even players like Johnson and everything, even though he's missed a bit, they're just starting to shake it off. And I think you can be more critical once we get to the second and third games on some of these players. But you just hope that they do get the opportunity to show something in the next two.
Yeah, you'd have to think next week Ross Lyon would be taking a much younger squad down over to Sydney. You'd have to think that a lot of those McFarlane, Pav, probably even Mundy to a degree, I think. I don't think many of those sort of players who are, edging 28 plus type players, I don't think any of those will probably travel. I'd be surprised. And, Sydney never really take the pre-season seriously. So it could be a bit of a nil or draw that next week, but...
Well, saying that at the moment, I'm just having a look at the halftime scores with Sydney and Brisbane, and Brisbane are leading 6-7-43 to Sydney's 3-4-22. So you're right with Sydney not taking it seriously, and I think they've done that the last few years, the same with us. So I'm sure, I think even Ross mentioned that some players like Ibbotson and Fife will probably come back in to have a run, and can't imagine Sandy, maybe he might. But it's just interesting, the players that he's missed, a similar squad, who comes out, and will the other young players like Weller, who's been doing quite well, get the chance to make a trip over and put his skill set in front of the coaching panel
Yeah,
for selection.
I know last week, Seppo, you were talking about having a few sneaky bets, but betting against Sydney in the pre-season is just about guaranteed dollars every time. they just, you know, you just know that they're not going to go out there and give it any sort of shake. And then, you know, interesting, like a lot of people write, you know, say, oh, if you get good pre-season form, but Sydney seem to buck the trend every year. But, you know, you do, as I said, you do want to see it as, you know, get your side going as best you can, because we do have a pretty tough start to the year. And obviously, if we can get all our guys up and running as best as possible between now and then, that would be ideal for Lyon and the coaching staff. Did anyone else sort of stand out for you yesterday as having, like, you know, in particular, like with just the way they used the ball, or any other part of it, Seppo, at all?
Well, one thing that I did pick up on was probably Subin and this new interpretation of the holding the ball rule. I suppose it's just in his nature to try and take people on and burrow through once he picks up the ball. But he is going to be our most pinged player with frees against for holding the ball this year if he's getting games, because he just seems to take that extra few seconds, or think he can break stride and break through people. And the umpires are going to be right on top of that and start to ping him, because there was a lot of calls for prior opportunity and holding the ball, because as soon as you've got it, if you're pretty much tackled and the ball, you're not disposing of it straight away, you're continuously moving and trying to get it on the boot. They seem to be pinning it this year. So I reckon Subin's one that just must think he's superhuman, or can, you know, bend time and space like guys like Barlow and Pendlebury and all those types. But he's just he's got a lovely, when he's in space and he can break free, he's very good. But I think he gets caught too much, and I don't know what you can do to change it. But yeah, you've got to admire his ability to get in there and go hard.
I mean, that's one thing. I think Subin's probably been that leading category against holding the ball, you know, for even the last couple of years. As you said, he does tend to, he just doesn't disguise it very well either. Every time he's sort of on the pack, he just looks like a model sort of person for giving away that, you know, demonstrating how to give away a holding the ball decision. But as you said, I thought he was one of our best in the first half yesterday, and obviously did show some good form as well in the pre-season game. So I think for him, it's just a matter of putting it together for 4 quarters. And, you know, the third quarter yesterday was pretty disappointing in terms of coming out and the way they played. But at the same time, it's hard to take a bit of a stretch away. I know that people are talking about how, like, Harry O and that sort of thing were playing well in the third quarter, and granted they were, but Ross Lyon pretty much allowed them to too. You could see there was no real defensive pressure, and there's no way that if they started off like that in the third quarter, Ross Lyon would leave players like Harry O or Labumba, or whatever you want to call him these days, like free in that running across half back there. He would have just locked him down. You know,
I suppose their stats were padded almost as much as Hill's stats were padded, because I don't think Hill would get that type of luxury and free space, because there was certainly no hard tag from Melbourne really being applied to anyone really out there. So I suppose they're more worried about their own ball and footy and not really running with guys like Hill. And so once Fife's out there as well, that's another person for opposition to watch. So the one thing that did pick up as well, I noticed with the ruck options, is I'm really liking Clark over Griffin. I know Griffin probably hasn't the best pre-season, and Clark's probably been nominated a couple of times for training the house down in certain sessions. He done quite well on the hit out. I know Griffin sort of won the number in terms of 16 to 14, but I reckon Clark looked to have the better leap in the ruck and probably taps to advantage. You could see what they were trying to do with the reverse tap behind and then the second dish out handball to the very back, and off they go. I think Clark was more proficient at the tapping and his ability to run around the ground and put on more pressure, where Griffin seemed to struggle, and I think he gave away a couple of free kicks around here and there, and probably didn't get too much of it in terms of around the ground like Clark got involved.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that Clark would definitely probably be the preferred option, you would think, for teaming up with Sandilands. He just gives us a little bit different, and unfortunately for Griffin, if he doesn't get the tap, he doesn't really offer a huge amount around the ground by comparison to Clark. And as you said, even that defensive pressure and that sort of stuff. I mean, that's not to say Clark certainly hasn't got room to improve, but as you said, if you're going head-to-head, you'd have to certainly give the points to Clark at this point. And I mean,
you just wonder if they go Clark as number one ruckman and put Sandy in the forward line at full forward, or if they put the other way around. And I don't know these days exactly how they're named or positioned, but certainly the Clark and Sandlands combo is a good one to run with. But you just wonder what that means in terms of positioning with the rest of the tools around the ground.
Yeah, I think it will also come down, as you said, to how they line up. You'd have to think if they go with Pav and Taberner, because Taberner sort of gives you more that running forward. And I mean, he does run good patterns. He does have the ability, an elite tank to run all day. So you think he'd be that sort of pushing out, and then you'd have Pav running from probably the 30 out to the 50, 55 metre mark, where he can certainly slot him, and then you have Sandy down in the goal square there, or Clark. I mean, Clark showed at times last year he can lead. Particularly in that derby, he played very, very well, but he just hasn't been able to put it together, for more than one or 2 weeks. And hopefully now that he's got over that the music festival thing and his knee's back to normal, he should be able to have a much more consistent year than last year. I think even in the final last year, he played with a punctured lung or something similar, or punctured rib, or broken rib or something. He had some injury anyway. So I think there's certainly signs there, but as you said, you just want to hope that some of those fringe players for us do stand up a little bit more, Seppo, because I think that's where that improvement's going to come from. We just need some of those guys to be sort of pushing those guys like Crowley, Pearce, who are started getting on a bit in age. We've got to have someone looking ready to take their spots, and hopefully, as you said, the likes of Blakely and those sort of blokes will be given a bit more of a run this week against Sydney.
It's quite interesting, even when you think about it, who we're missing: Sandlands, Fife, Daniel Pearce, Crowley, Dawson, there's Ibbotson. There's quite a few that missed this game that you just wonder how many they're actually going to bring back in, and who's actually going to be ready to go for round one. Because I can't imagine a player that hasn't had any pre-season games is just going to rock up into the round one side. So you just hope that these guys get right into it, and guys like Aptness may be dropped, and they might be trying someone else for next week. And I suppose you can kind of get an idea, like the emergencies of Duffy, Hanneth and Gray. I'm not sure if they're going to be tested out or flown across or given their chance, but once again it'd be harder for those guys to stake a claim for round one, because they're just there for depth, and probably all three of those might be listed as emergency a lot during the year, because that's sort of where they sit at the moment. So just be interesting what they do going forward.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can guarantee you, Seppo, if Sandlands or Fife come up and say, we haven't played pre-season, but I'm ready to go, Ross Lyon might just be able to slide them into the 22.
Just maybe they're exempt, but certainly they've got. I think they still need to have a run, albeit I don't know if we've got the timing, because we've got Sunday the 15th is our game against Eagles. Oh, sorry, Sydney. And then there's another couple. I think there's right until the very, very last NAB Challenge game, March the 22nd, is the West Coast Freo one. So it's basically week on week. So nothing until the 15th Sunday, and then another Sunday after that. So just think that by that Eagles game, the March 22nd, that Fife and Sandlands have both had at least a run. Yeah,
I think. I think if it was round one this week, Fife would have played. Even if you look at the. It's been over 3 weeks since he did the injury, and if you're looking at normal sort of timetable, that would be about right to go. So I think they've done the right thing in sort of just putting him in cotton wool. But I don't think there'll be any doubt that he'll probably play. If he doesn't play next week, he'll certainly play in the game against the Eagles and in the last NAB Cup game. And Sandlands will probably be the same. I'd be surprised if he travels. And it'll be just interesting to see if they maybe give the likes of someone like Hanneth a go next week as well in Sydney, and just to sort of see what happens with that. So it'll be interesting to see the makeup they go with next week for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Seppo, anything else you want to bring up, mate, before we move on to the contract news?
Nothing really. It was just great to see a win come through, and quite happy with that first hit out, and the fact that none of these injuries look really major. So hopefully Duffy pulls up, and we've got 9-10 days before our next game, and maybe they might just do the smart thing and rest all three of those guys that were injured, unless they miraculously pull up and need the match fitness. It'll be just great to see them maybe put on ice and know more. Yeah,
absolutely. And obviously a bit of contract news this week with two key re-signings for Fremantle, Seppo, with Zach Dawson and also Tendai Mzungu signing on.
Yeah, well, it's great to see Dawson's extended his contract out at 2017. So he's part of the group to sort of get nice long extension, and Mzungu's out to 2016. So I think it's about right for him at his age, and I suppose Dawson's really enjoying his time here, and Mzungu, I suppose, now getting old. I think he's getting on 29 or getting a bit older now, just like me, and
Yeah.
he's probably going to get to the stage where those guys go year on year contract extensions, and I think that's pretty smart because we've still got quite a few heaps of players left out coming out of contract at the end of this year, and when you're looking through the next list, the next sort of important ones, other than I suppose potential retirements in Pavlich, Sandilands, and McFarlane, you go down, you've got Duffield, Crowley, Sheridan, Clark, Crozier. Those guys are sort of the next sort of important players all coming out of contract at the end of this year. And even guys like Taberner, you think sooner or later he's going to get a good couple of deal. And a player like Taberner, I'd get him out to 2018 or 17 and give him a good couple of years to make sure we got good coverage.
Yeah, I think as you said, a couple of those key young players I think will be, I think the likes of Duffield and that probably A, wouldn't leave Freo, and B, you know, they know the club will look after them. I think the ones that will be sort of chased by other clubs will be the likes of Crozier, Sheridan, Taberner, those sort of blokes. So they're the ones they definitely need to try and get on board as sooner rather than later. I don't think there'll be a major issue, particularly, as you said, if those guys are given time to sort of develop. Sheridan would want to start being to push in that top 22 spot about now this year. So hopefully he will be able to take that next step. But as you said, to those other guys, they certainly will probably want to lock them up sooner rather than later.
Yep.
All right, anything, Seppo, on the board this week or anything else that you want to bring up before we finish up for this week?
No, other than the fact that it's the countdown's on to the start of round one. And if you haven't actually signed up for a Freo membership and you're listening, make sure you get on board because all clubs are sort of pushing for membership, and it'll be great because we're getting closer to overtaking the Eagles. So it'll be a great day when we can surpass the Eagles for membership, and I think we're getting closer to 50,000. So even if you're interstate member, get on board and buy whatever type of membership suits your level there. And really looking forward to. Fortunately, won't be able to get up to the Sydney game, and I'll just have to wait for round 2 down in Geelong to finally watch the first game live. So looking forward to it, and it's now a long wait to the start of the season.
Yeah, it'd be a nice rare change for me to actually be able to go and see both games, round 1 and 2 live this year, Seppo. So it'll be nice to get down to the Cattery and have a look down there. And as I said, hopefully the boys will come out and be firing up. So that's we'll leave it this week for now, and obviously we'll bring it back next week when after maybe the Sydney game, and we'll sort of dissect that, and hopefully we'll see some of these young fringe 22 best players continuing to push for a spot, Seppo.
That's it, and we'll speak to you all next time.
All right, and just one quick thing, Seppo, before we go. Is there any competitions in terms of the footy tipping, draft, fantasy, or anything like that that we need to let the people know about what's happening on the big footy board?
Yeah, we're still a couple of league spots short to fill League 1 for the Supercoach, so hit up me if you want to join up that. There'll be some big footy tipping coming on soon. I think we're going to roll around the comp from next year, so keep an eye out for that. And there's some couple other fantasy leagues, and I think someone's got a draft league going as well. So if you're interested, have a look at all the labels tag competitions on our board, and you'll be able to find them and get involved.
All right, thanks for that, Seppo. So just obviously either send him a PM or just look out for it on the board. And that's it for this week. Fremantle once again continuing to go on their merry way and, as I said, collect an 18-point win. And hopefully we'll see a little bit more polish next week and see those guys sort of implementing those sort of new game patterns that they're trying to implement and keeping the ball a little bit more and transferring the ball a little bit more quickly. So that's it for this week, and we'll catch you next week. Bye for now.